Rowan Blake hadn't planned on returning to California that summer. After a long consultancy stint in Bordeaux, he had promised himself a break Lisbon, long walks, good books, and absolutely no clients. But when a message from an old associate landed in his inbox, vague yet urgent, it changed everything. Within 48 hours, he found himself seated in a minimalist Montecito boardroom, face to face with Meghan Markle's branding team. He listened carefully as the team outlined their vision for As Ever Rose. The words came quickly authentic. Feminine, California bloom, subtle class. They spoke of disruptor wine brands and new audiences. One assistant scrolled through mood boards filled with lavender fields and soft focus, shots of women in flowing dresses holding pastel glasses. The vineyard chosen for the launch had only been operational for 5 years, and the grapes, as Rowan quietly noted from the specs, lacked consistency. Still, no one in the room acknowledged that. Instead, they kept calling it excessively aspirational. Rowan took slow notes, tapping the edge of his pen against a leather-bound notebook. He didn't offer much. He knew his job wasn't to speak yet. His role was to craft the story, to create the emotional arc around the wine, regardless of how it actually tasted. And yet, even as he nodded and appeared engaged, a quiet discomfort began to settle in his chest. Something about the whole affair felt hollow. After the meeting, they handed him a bottle with a handwritten tag and told him to get a feel for it. He took it back to the small guest house they had arranged for him and opened it with careful fingers. The cork came loose, easily. The first pour didn't fizz, but the scent hit him immediately sweet, almost artificial, with a sharpness that reminded him of synthetic strawberry. He didn't even sip it. Instead, he set the glass down and stared at a dot. Then he took out his phone and opened his notes app. At the top of the page, he typed one sentence: "This is going to be a very delicate job." He left the glass untouched and sat outside in the garden, the California air warm on his skin, trying to piece together how to build a legacy brand around something that, if anyone were honest, didn't quite deserve one. Julian Fielding's mornings always began the same way: steel-cut oats, one black coffee, and a stack of sample bottles arranged neatly on the edge of his oak tasting table. He had spent the last 3 decades building a reputation as the man who never flinched in his reviews. Wine brands feared him, collectors trusted him, and when the courier delivered a sleek, blush-colored bottle labeled As Ever Rose to his doorstep, he didn't blink. He simply added it to the end of his morning list. He uncorked the bottle just past 9 a.m. The aroma that wafted up made his brows tighten. It was sweet, overly so. Not the subtle fruit notes of a carefully aged rose, but something louder, almost candy-like. He swirled the glass, watched the legs cling lazily to the side, and brought it to his lips. The sip was shallow. He didn't need more than that dot. Then he wrote the first 3 words in his notebook: artificial, confused, pretending. Julian didn't need drama to make his points. He prided himself on precision, and this wine, whatever marketing spin might surround it, lacked integrity. He tapped out a short review, calling the rose synthetic in flavor, clumsy in balance, and shockingly overpriced for what it delivered. He compared it to a perfume sample at a department store: attractive packaging, but ultimately hollow. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, satisfied that he had told the truth. His assistant posted the review on a modest wine blog, expecting little traction. But within hours, it was picked up by a viral subreddit known for mocking celebrity products. The phrase "perfume disguised as alcohol" began trending. TikTokers stitched it into comedy skits. Wine enthusiasts shared it with smug captions. And by nightfall, the hashtags #CheapWine and #MarkleMerlot were circulating with relentless speed. Julian didn't react. He closed his laptop, poured himself a glass of real Pinot, and went back to pruning the basil in his window garden. But the next morning, when he opened his inbox, it was flooded YouTube interviews, podcast requests, influencer DMiz asking if he'd collaborate. And somewhere in Montecito, Rowan Blake sat at his desk, staring at the now infamous review, realizing that the storm had officially begun. Elias Moreau arrived in Los Angeles with little fanfare. He traveled light, one suitcase, one laptop, and a reputation for cleaning up elite messes that couldn't be scrubbed with PR statements alone. By the time his car pulled up to the As Ever brand office in Montecito, the viral backlash had reached its peak. Wine reviewers, comedy channels, and even daytime talk shows were echoing the same criticism. The rose was all label. No soul. Inside the office, the mood had turned brittle. Assistants whispered in corners. Screens displayed plummeting engagement graphs. Rowan Blake stood near the glass wall, arms crossed, watching Elias approach like someone watching the arrival of a surgeon, unsure if the patient could still be saved. Elias didn't ask for coffee. He didn't shake hands. Instead, he placed his laptop on the centered table, connected to the screen, and began his presentation without introduction. He outlined what had gone wrong not with the wine, but with the story. The critics weren't just mocking the taste. They were mocking the illusion. People no longer believed in polished celebrity products wrapped in lifestyle quotes. They wanted grit, mistakes, reality. Then he laid out a new plan. They would shift the narrative. From perfection to process, from product to person. He proposed a short-form documentary, something raw and unscripted, where Meghan would be shown walking through the vineyard barefoot, interacting with local farmers, and reflecting on how the wine was part of her personal journey, flawed, evolving, real. No studio lighting. No edits. He called it the summer pause. Meghan's team hesitated. The risk of showing vulnerability was not something they had rehearsed for. But Elias insisted that the alternative, continuing to push the rose as an elite experience, would be brand suicide. Rowan, watching quietly from the edge, gave a single nod. He knew Elias was right. The old plan was dead. They needed to sell emotion, not alcohol. Later that evening, Elias walked alone through the vineyard, filming test shots with his phone. He crouched near a vine, touched a dry leaf, and whispered into his recorder, "Start with the soil. Start with the truth." The rebranding had begun. But he also knew that once you open the door to vulnerability, you can't control what else walks through. July 1st arrived under a quiet Montecito sky. The sun was slow to rise, and so were the people inside the As Ever brand house. By 6:30 a.m., Elias Moreau was already stationed at the temporary media command center they had built overnight in the guest wing. He sipped strong coffee, eyes flicking across 3 monitors, each tracking live feedback from YouTube, TikTok, and Shopify. The launch was scheduled for 11 a.m. sharp, but the first ripples had already started. The documentary went live at 10:50 a.m. It opened not with a drone shot or music, but with Meghan kneeling in loose jeans, brushing dirt off her palms, laughing off camera with a vineyard worker named Hector. It was a stripped-down edit, raw and personal. The story followed her through foggy mornings, dusty boots, and hand-poured samples that didn't always hit the mark. The final scene showed her holding a glass of the rose under a lemon tree, saying nothing, just taking a sip and smiling faintly as birds chirped in the background. By 11:15, orders began trickling in. Influencers reposted snippets of the film with soft captions. Lifestyle bloggers praised the honesty of the visual tone. Within an hour, As Ever had its highest single-day site traffic since launch. Elias leaned back in his chair, crossed one leg over the other, and allowed himself a rare moment of silence. But it didn't last. At 1:04 p.m., Julian Fielding uploaded a new video. It featured a blind taste test. 5 participants, 3 bottles, one of them as ever Rose, the others low-cost supermarket alternatives. The reactions were devastating. One woman laughed after sipping Meghan's wine and said it tasted like liquid makeup remover. Another man asked if the bottle had been left open in the sun. The clip was cut brutally tight, made for sharing, within 3 hours. The test video had 2 million views. Elias stared at the screen, watching the comment count climb. Behind him, Rowan paced slowly, murmuring into his phone with the distributor. The office, just hours earlier filled with cautious hope, began to fall back into tension. Even Meghan's social media team grew quiet, unsure whether to post again or retreat. Outside, the vineyard workers continued their harvest. Indifferent to the storm online. Inside, Elias opened his laptop again and began rewriting the next phase. The wine had found its moment, but the battle for its soul was far from over.